Today we're joined with Lizzy Kurtzer, a menopause cycle coach for the workplace, working with businesses to create inclusive cultures for people with periods. Lizzy has joined us today to explain the ways in which people with periods in the workplace are struggling with their menstrual cycles and how employers can improve these working conditions through educational resources, health testing, and menstrual leave policies. We'll be learning all about how each phase of our cycles can impact us on a physical and mental level, and how important it is for workplaces to consider these factors. Hi, Lizzy. Thanks for joining us today.
Hi, Sarah. Thank you for having me.
um, Brad, I was just wondering if you could give kind of a general introduction on how you came into this kind of work and a little bit about your background.
Yeah, sure. I'm a menstrual cycle coach for the workplace, and I did psychology at uni. I've always had like a real interest in people and behavior, and then I found myself in executive search. And working internally with our business, leading teams, people development, and then also working with our director on C-level roles, on hiring. So I spent a lot of time talking to like VP up boards about leadership, diversity in the workplace, women in the workplace. And so both kind of sparked a bit of fire in my belly about, yeah, women in leadership, women in the workplace. And from an internal perspective, in my role, I really observed how the menstrual cycle really impacts women in the workplace. Um,
Mhm.
and stress and confidence and it's just not being spoken about and the impact of that. And then equally I observed externally where I was working with organizations on hiring, um, the barriers to women into the workplace and the barriers to women into leadership. And then I kind of stumbled across this whole work around menstrual cycle awareness. And I realized for me, it was like a real missing piece that if we wanted to, yeah, remove barriers for women in the workplace, we really needed to understand the menstrual cycle, both people who
Mhm.
have menstrual cycles, because I don't really think that, we understand it, as well as people who don't have menstrual cycles.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, hopefully we'll get to touch on the stigma surrounding periods in general in society. I think we're kind of raised from an early age to be a little bit like, keep that kind of stuff secretive a little, it's something you share with other women, but like, whether it was to consider that it would be a roadblock for us, that if you're talking about it, men around you or people that don't have a menstrual cycle might make assumptions about your ability. People aren't informed on it. And, we're kind of just trained to, keep it to ourselves. And I wonder how you're kind of seeing this in your work and also tackling the stigma surrounding it.
Yeah, because I think you're right. Like, for a lot of people, we're just not taught to talk about it, and some people are comfortable with it, but a lot of people aren't. And there is just, I think there is two pieces. There's just so much the taboo around it being, not being able to talk about it, and the impact that has on individuals. When we're not allowed to talk about something, that the stress that that can cause, and then equally, it's kind of
Hmm.
trivialized. The menstrual cycle and the periods, like it's not that big of a deal. And and I think some of the things that I hear from women and people with menstrual cycles is like, yeah, I just don't know how to talk about it. I mean, I hear that all the time where I'll be with an organization and we'll be talking about how we could work together. And they will be saying things like, we have a really open culture, like people can talk about anything. And invariably someone might pipe up and say, yeah, but I would never know how to talk to you about my period. I wouldn't feel comfortable about saying, I need, can I work from home? Or, can this
Hmm.
wait? Like, or just, or how they're feeling. So I think it's just this piece that like it's just not spoken about. And then the added stress that that
Hmm.
causes.
Absolutely. I mean, I think exactly right in saying that it's such a trivialized thing. I mean, like we're kind of getting to a point now where we all recognize that, it's something that half the population experience and are kind of constantly minimizing. And that's such a female experience, or anyone that's kind of, had to face discrimination in any kind of workplace knows that if you're raising something, it might reduce opportunities for you. And obviously, like I'd say, things have changed massively now with more policies in place. But for a long time, like women's menstrual cycle throughout the entire experience would be a massive barrier into the positions they get into. Like I know we've spoken to a lot of menopause experts, and that's just kind of that tail end of what your cycle is it's the ending, but it's still like a huge transitional period in your life and can be so difficult for a lot of women, and that can then mean they might need to take time off work, they might not be able to perform at their best ability, they might be having mental health problems, and that can be a barrier for women in leadership positions. You were mentioning earlier that that's an important part of your position. And yeah, I mean, it's funny when you think about how much women or and people with periods have had to minimize their own pain and mental health that comes with periods and the menstrual cycle. It's really disheartening. And I wonder if you can kind of talk about
Mm.
the kind of work you've done now within workplaces and the main factors that are affecting women, whether that's kind of burnout, lack of support within workplaces.
Yeah, so I think it is really about one, like what's going on in that organization and like where do menstruators feel they need support, and equally how like yeah, how do we support our menstruators? Um and it's understanding like it's not just a period. Like one, it's not just a period, it's the whole menstrual cycle. And there are so many different things that can be impacting an individual. And when we look at burnout, like what is like the number one reason why women are leaving the workplace, like burnout is women are leaving the workplace and leaving the organizations. And then when we think about the menstrual cycle, it's central to their well-being. It was in 2018, the American Body of Obstetrics and Gynecology named it the sixth vital sign after, like respiratory rate, temperature, um, cardiovascular, I can't think of the five, but so the sixth vital sign, because it's so rich with information, yet like, as you mentioned, it's like minimized. And stress, like women have, men operate kind of on this 24-hour cycle with their main hormones, with testosterone kind of rises in the morning, drops, peaks around midday, drops in the afternoon. And someone with a menstrual cycle, their cycle is about a 28-day cycle, give or take. We know that everyone will have different lengths of their cycles, but there's so many things that can be impacting them, whether it's painful heavy periods, PMS, premenstrual syndrome, endometriosis, fibroids, polycystic ovarian syndrome, PMDD, which is premenstrual depressive disorder. There's so many different things that can be going on for individuals. And I think really important to note that, say you're using endometriosis for an example, you could have two people with endometriosis having exactly the same interventions, having very different outcomes. So it's really important to recognize, yeah, that there can be a lot happening
Hmm.
underneath, and the added stress it causes when you're not allowed to talk about it, or you just don't feel like comfortable and safe to. Because I know it's like we're kind of repeating ourselves, but it's just not been the norm. It's just not been encouraged or embraced, and like the fear of the consequences of it's kind of normalized. I feel like I should be able to get on with it because everyone else just gets on with it. So, what does it say about me if I'm someone who says, I don't feel like I can come into the office today, or I don't feel like I can lead that meeting today, or yeah, I can't actually get up from my chair right now because I
Yeah.
bled through my clothes. So I'm just going to sit here. There's all these like sort of things that we need to think about. So like really going into organizations, and one thing, and kind of helping organizations think like, what is actually going on in here? Is it something that we talk about? Is it something that our employees feel comfortable talking about? How do our managers feel comfortable engaging in those conversations? And then it's all about,
I
that
mean,
education
yeah,
piece,
it's
which I think is
it's
just really
amazing that in the
important.
last few years people have become so aware of something that's existed forever, which is the menstrual cycle, about the different stages and phases that your cycle goes through. Like, I haven't actually really researched it myself. It's just something that my tracker app will like tell me sometimes. They're like, you're in this phase now, and these are the kind of things that will boost your mental health, or like,
I've just lost you. Are you there, Sarah?
Hello?
Hello.
I don't know what this is even. I'm so nervous it's going to stop recording again. So sorry about that. I don't
That's
know
okay.
why it chooses to do this.
Mine's the
Okay.
same.
Anyway, sorry. So what I had been saying was about the different stages of the cycle, and I wonder if you could kind of go into a little bit more detail on what the different stages of the cycle are and maybe how it impacts us physically and mentally and how that kind of feeds into our stress and our hormones and our health in general.
Yeah, absolutely. Because the thing is, like, our hormones change throughout the cycle, and that has a very real impact on how we feel, our energy, our mental focus, how we show up. And I think I always feel like it's important to say, like, no one's suggesting we can't do our job when through our hormone changes, but just acknowledging like what those changes are and how it can make us feel. Has a huge impact on our well-being and how we feel. So in the first half of your cycle, you've got estrogen, which is you've got the dominant hormone, I should say, is estrogen. So after your period finishes, estrogen is really on rising. And that's a real like get up and go hormone. It is linked with mental focus, clarity. It's linked with dopamine and our neurotransmitters. It really like drives us to connect, because if you think what it's building up to ovulation, which is when an egg is released, which is we wanted to have a baby. That would be the time. So it's kind of getting us out there and connecting. And so that's a really great, that's a part of the time of your cycle where you might notice like that rise in energy, feeling, we sometimes call estrogen like the rose tinted glasses hormone. You feel good, you're optimistic, you have good energy, and a little bit more extroverted. And then as you move into sort of the middle phase of your cycle, so that's in your follicular phase, as you moved into ovulation, in their combination, testosterone, estrogen, and progesterone are at their highest in their combination. And so this is the middle part or the peak of our cycle. It really is the main event of our cycle. We focus on our periods a lot. We forget about ovulation, and it's when I would say, like, we're most buffered. We've got the most hormones in our system. We're really buffered, and this is where people will feel like may feel more most confident. Again, it's a great time when with work, to be taking action. So I'd always say to people, like, if you're in it, it's a great time to be filming and to be doing a webinar, right? It's a great time to be pitching business. It's a great time to be collaborating with people, where you maybe have more capacity and more resiliency. And then you move into the second half of your hormone. And on the first half of your second half of your hormones, the luteal phase, progesterone is the dominant hormone. And progesterone is a lovely, soothing, calming hormone. And it's really slowing our body down. But in the world that we live in, where it's kind of like go, 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 it's like no stopping. Um, there's kind of two things that can happen, because often you'll hear women say, like, the second half of my cycle is horrendous. This is where we hear about PMS, PMT. I really struggle. It's when my energy dives, my confidence takes a bit of a hit. I feel really stressed out. And so there's two things happening there. One, when we're cortisol levels can really like hijack our progesterone. So we're not really like feeling the effects of that soothing, calming hormone of progesterone. And two, just living in a world that kind of wants you to keep going, but your body's sort of asking you to slow down, can really cause like this tension. So it's interesting, we call it
Mm,
sometimes PMT, like premenstrual tension, because there is this, in my eyes, this external tension of my body asking me to slow down, and the world wanting me to keep going. Um, and then equally, just before you get your period, just before your bleed comes, your hormones are at their lowest. So when we think about ovulation, where in their combination, the hormones are at their highest, and just before our bleed comes, they're at their lowest. This is where I experience this myself, not knowing this, but equally I would witness so much with women and people with periods, where this is where you're least buffered, right? You've got like nothing buffering you, like kind of like that, like
mm,
no juice in the tank. And so again, the world is like demanding a lot from you, and it's almost like you feel quite bare. Your capacity. This is where your capacity is kind of at its lowest. And so again, just having that awareness around, can I? And again, it's not about not being able to do our job. It's not about not being able to show up, but it's just having an awareness of, um, maybe I'm not feeling like I want to stand in front of everyone and do a presentation. And maybe I have, but I can
Hmm.
at least acknowledge, but hey, like this is what's going on for me, and I'm acknowledging that. Or if you are in tune with your cycle and you're aware of it, like how can you support yourself so that perhaps you're scheduling things in different parts of your cycle where you are more resilient, you have more capacity. So it's really interesting having the acronym PMS and changing it to please more space, or PMT to please more time in that second half of your cycle. Rather than, there's parts of your cycle where you might kind of be a little bit more go, 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 extroverted. Second half of your cycle, just slowing down a little bit more time, a little bit more space, and maybe a little bit more introverted. But discernment is a really
Hmm.
big piece as well in that second half of the cycle, that we get a real truth speaker that comes through, that I think sometimes women and people with periods haven't been taught to harness. So yeah, there's this very like really very real experience that we have with our different hormones, that if we can actually get to know and be in tune with, we can really use them to support us. Does that answer your question?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's so interesting. I mean, I think it definitely is something where having something where you can maybe explain, this is why I'm feeling this kind of way, or this is why I feel like I'm not reaching the targets that I'm setting for myself or are being expected of me at work, and it not be personally like, oh, this is my fault. It's something that is out of my control, but something I can learn more about and then work alongside of
Yeah,
is just so interesting. Wow.
yeah, it's really like,
And
sorry, oh, sorry.
oh, no, no, please go on.
I think to your point, yeah, that agency of like, there is something that I can do about this. And then equally, like you say, like rather than thinking there's something wrong with me, I think so many women and menstruators internalize like, oh, and I hear this so many with women I maybe work with one to one with, which is when they notice that like shift in their cycle and their body pull back, it's a bit like, why am I such a rubbish human? Because like it's
Mm,
so glorified, like achieving and doing and being busy, that when their body's kind of like, hey, kind of putting out those markers that like you need to slow down. I'm not saying you need to stop, or that again that you can't do anything, but your body's kind of like just a little bit less energized. And like you say, you're maybe not hitting the targets that you wanted to, or you're not articulating yourself as well as you kind of feel, or you notice that like, well, why was it last week that I felt like absolute superwoman, and this week I'm kind of questioning my abilities here, and without this education, so many women and menstruators internalize that, and and they like really beat themselves up. So I think this is where this education is just so important.
mm. Yeah, and I mean, in terms of educational resources for workplaces, what are the kind of ones that you utilize or you direct organizations to invest like time in teaching or workshops for their employees or just for managers to better support menstruators in the office to make accommodations for those kind of different, because it's a wide scale of people can have zero issues on their periods, and in other women it can be a whole range of things from, I mean, we talked about endometriosis and PCOS earlier. So, like, what kind of advice are you bringing towards the employers to kind of support their employees?
Yeah, it like you say, like there's so much you can actually do, and a one-off training is great, but it's not going to really, make the long kind of that lasting impact. And so I think it's about like, one, what is within your resources that you can be doing, and where is your priority? Is our priority that we really want to educate menstruators and women and people with periods about their periods, because I think that is one piece, really teaching them to get intimate with their cycles and knowing how they can support themselves is huge, because we know this, we're just not taught it. We're not, about our bodies, about our hormones. So I think that is one piece. I think educating educating men and non-menstruators about the menstrual cycle so that they understand. You know, if they don't have a peer who has a period, they might have a boss that, you know, their manager might have a period, someone who directly reports into them, and if not, they will have a daughter, a wife, a sister. They will know someone, and I hear from men and non-menstruators all the time that they really appreciate that education. Then I think educating your managers is really important so that they feel comfortable to receive those conversations, um, and and then you can choose also, as we've mentioned, it's teaching about the menstrual cycle and then menstrual health and gynecological disorders that go alongside those, because it's not a one size fits all. It's a very individualistic experience, like you've
Mm.
mentioned. One person might not be experiencing any premenstrual symptoms, and someone sitting next to them might be really suffering quite poorly each month and have no idea about what interventions they could be doing. And again, they'll be internalizing it. So yeah, I think there's like different things that you can be doing within an organization to educate the different layers.
I imagine on a wider scale as well, it kind of goes into policies on women's health and policy on period health, and how that's kind of, changed and been reshaped over the last few years. I think just with that fact that people are paying a lot more attention to the significance of the cycle and how it impacts people, and the delicate balance of hormones. I mean, something that we're trying to do and we're, doing is health testing. And we offer like a kind of range of bespoke tests, which are kind of more hormone focused.
Mm,
And we have like a menopause range at the moment, which is kind of, just kind of about empowering women, or, people experiencing menopause, to take control of that narrative again, because it can be quite disarming and a stressful experience, especially in a workplace where you're kind of thinking, how is this going to affect my career? I mean, there's 13 million people in the UK experiencing menopause, and only 27% typically disclose that they're experiencing it or their symptoms, because of that stigma surrounding women's health in general, and that it's something that's kind of been swept under the rug for millennia. So I think that's something that we're kind of trying to do, just taking the power and giving it back to the individual, and working with organizations to kind of encourage people to investigate their health a little bit further, especially when it comes to your hormones. Because I know, me personally, like, it's only something in the last few years I've become cognizant of, is that like my hormones impact so many things, especially what cycle I'm in. So it's kind of exciting now, but I wish that when I was like 14, someone would have given me like a map of, this is all that your cycle is, this is each stage of it and how it's going to change. And it's a very individual experience, as you were saying, like not every person's journey is going to be the same with their menstrual health. But, having those kind of resources in schools and workplaces just make it a safer and more inclusive space to talk about it. I
mm.
think is that kind of also what you're seeing with the people with, that it's, even just that open door completely changes the environment of workplaces, I imagine.
Yeah, this is it. I think like the first thing a lot of businesses like they just haven't ever done anything, and so it's just opening the door to be able to have the conversation. Should an employee want to? We're not saying they have to, but should they wish to, that they can have that conversation. And I think like yeah, like with the hormone testing, it's fantastic because like how many women and menstruators or women and people going through menopause are like working like fighting against themselves, like they're working against themselves like
Mm.
unnecessarily, versus being able to know about their bodies and what's going on for them, and then being able to seek the help that they need, um, is just so important.
Absolutely. I think it's also kind of, recognizing things that people kind of can typically forget, especially in relation to like how women's health in medicine has ever been treated, and that like for so long, so many things have been dismissed, and like people have been ignored, and it's led to very serious like epidemics in women's health and in the health of so many marginalized groups. And, I think with, that's something that we're really trying to focus in on, the menopause treatment, is that how can we make this as specifically targeted and tailored for women? So, initially we had the same kind of Lancet testing, blood collection, tools that we had for the Ever test. And then, we realized that, well, a lot of women on HRT creams, that it won't work or it can
Mm.
be a little bit more painful. And then there's this really amazing device called the Tap 2 device where it collects blood from the upper arm in like a practically pain-free way. Like there's always going to be a little bit of a pinch, but it doesn't interact or interfere with HRT creams. And that's just the kind of stuff that, people forget about that, or, if it's not created by the people that are experiencing it, there's always going to be forgotten things. And I think that's a tried and true thing with menstrual, products for so long, is that, until it's people actually knowing what they're talking about. So I think that's amazing, the work you're doing to kind of, you know, dismantle and encourage menstruating people to talk about what's going on in their bodies. And that opens the door for so many else.
Yeah, thank you.
I just want to know anything else that you're kind of working with, or anything that, in the future, that you kind of want to expand in that conversation, or what your kind of your thoughts are on the future of this kind of the work you're doing.
Yeah, it's. I think that we're just at the beginning. There's still so much work to be
Hmm.
done, and there's a lot, so many different avenues that we can go down in terms of conversations around like the inclusion piece, making sure that we're thinking about our non-binary and trans community when we're talking about
Hmm.
periods. And I think it's just this piece that what's really important for me is that, yeah, it's just our hormones are just central to our well-being. And so then again, when we think about and central to our energy and like how we are every day, our hormones are doing something different every day of our cycle. And so when we think about women in leadership, women in business, removing barriers for women to move up,
Hmm.
like the broken rung is like still like the biggest barrier to women into leadership. And what are the perceptions of women um, in the workplace, and how we've come this far without talking about this like piece that is just central to us. And so I just think we just have to
Yeah.
keep having the conversation and keep, it might be uncomfortable for some people, but change is uncomfortable and difference is uncomfortable, but that doesn't mean it's a bad thing. It's a wonderful thing. So I think we just have to
Hmm.
keep on going.
Well, absolutely. And I think, it's like for so long, like periods have been the kind of butt of every joke,
Mm.
especially by like male kind of, voices. So I think kind of actually being, it's very dismissive of so many areas of women's health, but also the reality of it, that they aren't just something that women, have to deal with a week out of their life, a week out of their month. It's like a continuously affecting thing for the majority of your life. Um, and I also think, I feel like your services and probably other people working in what you do, like it would be invaluable for kind of universities, kind
Mm.
of that starting people, educating people when they're at this kind of like they're at the beginning of their career essentially, they're figuring out what they want to do. And also instilling that like you have a voice so early on. And because that was so huge for me whenever I started college. It was when people first started talking about consent more clearly and
Mm.
having workshops. And I think stuff like that, kind of for both male and female and non-binary and inclusive talks, that kind of stuff would be so amazing. And it's probably something I see on the horizon of the kind of where things are going. So hopefully that is the case.
Yeah, it's really interesting that like for one day it to be the norm when you're looking at like professional development and leadership programs and like you say entering the workforce and at university, that it's just the norm, that when we're considering our life trajectory, that this is part of the conversation.
Hmm. Absolutely. Well, Lizzie, thank you so much for speaking with me today. I'm sorry for all the little technical issues, but hopefully we were able to cover everything we wanted to. And yeah, I just want to thank you for all the amazing work you're doing. I feel like I've definitely learned a lot more about my kind of body, and I want to now kind of investigate that further, because you want to be performing optimally in work, but also in your social life and in your own personal happiness, to kind of get the most out of it. And as you were saying earlier, like harnessing the kind of power of it instead of working against it, it would be the catalyst for a lot of like great personal development. So I think that's really inspiring, and I'm kind of excited to look into it further.
Amazing. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. Okay. Okay. Just stopping recording there.